It's not altruistic. It is strategic in the sense that it allows China to position itself as a preferred partner.
Could China's initiative be viewed as good for developing countries in Africa?
Well, that question depends on African countries themselves. There are many examples of African countries that have managed their relations with China quite strategically in ways where they are able to get beneficial outcomes while mitigating the risks, right? So there are countries like Liberia, for instance, countries like Senegal, countries like Ghana that have been able to manage, countries like Ivory Coast and quite a few others that have been able to manage their relations with China in ways that do not incur debt burdens, in ways that ensure that livelihoods are protected, that local industries are protected, and that sort of thing. The problem is that those positive examples are not even. It's not even across the African continent. That is where the problem is. But really, the ball is going to be on the African side, right, in terms of the level of agency that they'll be able to exert in managing and balancing their relationships. There are quite a number of things that African countries can do to leverage their relationship, to put their relationship on a more equal footing. And these are issues that are not new. These are issues that have been raised by African observers, African experts on China-Africa relations, on think tanks, independent African scholars. There's a groundswell of opinion on the African continent that are putting concrete proposals on the table on how African countries can actually manage their relationship in a more strategic way.
Do African leaders seem willing to go along with China's plans in order to get what they want?
Yes, for the most part, it's a quid pro quo relationship, right? I do for you and you do for me, right? In Chinese, this is known as guangqi, right? These are relationships, right, that are built on granting concessions to the other party in order to gain from the other party, right? So there are exchanges, right? So when you look at the positions that African countries take diplomatically, right? When you look at, for instance, discussions on things like Xinjiang, discussions on the Hong Kong security law, and other issues like Taiwan, issues around Tibet, whenever those issues come up in the UN Human Rights Council and in other multilateral organizations, African countries have a tradition of voting alongside China and defending China and defending Chinese interest. I think it's important to remember that, recall, when the former Speaker of the House, when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, the criticism that came from outside of mainland China, the vast majority of criticism came from African governments. African governments were very quick to condemn Nancy Pelosi, right? But African countries are not doing that just because, Taiwan is far away. It doesn't really affect African countries directly. But there are things that African countries are looking for in return, right? Loan finance, infrastructure finance, energy and things like that. So it is an exchange. And a lot of the time, China-Africa relations are described as very transactional. African countries are also very transactional in the ways that they engage the People's Republic of China.
You noted that, speaking of the UN, you noted that China didn't even mention the push by several African leaders to get 2 permanent seats on the UN Security Council. Is that significant?
Well, it's significant in the sense that the Chinese position is not clear. So China rhetorically has a foreign policy stance of supporting, amplifying, and strengthening African interests in multilateral affairs, and in championing the reform of the multilateral system in ways that promote African interest. But when it comes to African representation on the Security Council, the Chinese side has been ambiguous. In terms of, does China support African permanent representation on the Council? 1. 2. Does China support a veto for African countries? The Chinese position is very ambiguous.